Welcome to Self Wellness.
Joining me today is Mike Dillon, and he's the founder of Air Water Healing, and he's involved in numerous other projects, and he is best known for the Traid air technology solution, but he's also extremely well informed on the practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves from polluted air, contaminated air, moldy air, etc. So welcome to the show, Mike. It's great to have you on today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate your work. And I love that you are Mr. Transparency, one of the most consistent guys that I've been following for the last 2 decades.
Well, thank you. It is something that I'm committed to transparency and sticking to values. And I love the fact that you're wearing the Make Air Healthy Again shirt. Maha.
Come on.
Make air healthy again. No, see, it works both ways. It's great. And you're the air expert. So tell us what's wrong with our air, that especially the indoor air that people are breathing in homes and offices. Let's just start with the big picture.
So, one of the biggest issues, Mike, is when we decided to go energy efficient, right? It was really good for our electric bills, right? You've got the cold air staying cool and the hot air staying hot when you've got North America, anywhere basically north of Tallahassee and then all the way spreading across the West Coast. We came up with this incredible building design, especially, here in Florida. After Hurricane Andrew wreaked havoc, they changed the building code, and it kind of became the standard for protecting homes against catastrophic type winds. But the one thing that they didn't plan for was trapping all of these particulate matters and cancer-causing material inside of the home. And you're not just talking about like hardwood. You're talking about like varnish, paints, and all of these synthetic things that we bring into our house unknowingly, and we kind of trapped them in.
Well, absolutely. So they shut down air exchange with the outside air, is what they did in order to get the green rating for the home. I've talked about this too, but people don't realize, like, if you have carpet, which I despise, I don't have any carpet at all, but some people have carpet. When you vacuum that carpet, you are unleashing a massive cloud of polyester particles. And then when you buy new furniture, it's off-gassing, like formaldehyde and 50 other chemicals. And the indoor environment becomes crazy toxic compared to just stepping outside on the front porch, right?
Correct.
So what are the main issues in terms of indoor air that people deal with? Is it the VOCs, or is it the mold? Is it the particulate matter? Like, what's the worst of it in your view?
So I think that mold is definitely should be in the top 3, right? If not number 1. I've been doing the podcast scene for quite the time here. I had a lady a couple months ago that was on my podcast. She's a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and she also was exposed to black mold. And she said to me, she goes, Mike, I would rather take on breast cancer again than what I went through with mold, because mold is a neurotoxin. And a lot of people, they call it a silent killer because sometimes you can't even smell it depending on where it is inside of the home. And believe it or not, it's somewhere between 70 to 80% of every house in America has some form of mold. Now, I'm not trying to scare the public and say that this is behind the drywall and it's gotten into your HVAC handler. It could just be, some mold that's present where moisture is. Water is a very, very small molecule, so it can easily penetrate the grout inside of the bathroom. So if you're not constantly sealing your grout the way that you're supposed to, you could be exposing yourself to mold every single time you take a shower. You could have it growing, underneath your sink. It could be very microscopic and very small and undetectable, or it could grow on the wall where you're like, hey, a pipe had burst and now it's coming through the wall. That's where it's very easy because now you can see it. So you get the mold contractors to come out.
Yeah. And that can be incredibly expensive. And then the actual mold removal and the restoration process is insanely expensive. And it turns out most home insurance companies will deny those claims for the most part. They won't do it. It's much less expensive to prevent the mold right up front. And you're right, Mike. Even I look under my kitchen sink, there's probably some mold under there, and then also the HVAC handler in your home, it's got condensate. There's water that's dripping out of that, and hopefully all that water is getting outside, but maybe not all of it is. There are a lot of areas, or your clothes washing machine. Do you have a drip with the connection with your plumbing? You could have a small drip even under your house or in a basement that grows mold without you even knowing it. And you're right, you don't smell it. You don't even know it's there until something horrible goes wrong. Or roof leaks. I've actually seen that myself too. Roof leaks. Haven't you seen homes that have like a little tiny roof leak and then it just mold just up above the ceiling?
Yeah. And it gets into different places, and it can get into the batting, and it can get into, when it gets into the HVAC system, it starts spreading around. And, we hear it time and time again, and people go, well, how do I know if I have mold? I don't want to spend all this money, and it's so expensive to test for mold. And, what are things that we can be looking out for? And I always tell people, if you leave your home and you go on a vacation, even for a couple days, or you're outside all day and your symptoms start to feel better and you start to get more mental clarity, and then you come back, especially when someone Mike's been gone for 2 or 3 days, and then they come back to their home and the symptoms start coming back, that's a good sign that something has gone wrong inside of your home.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing. Go ahead.
No. So, and what I was going to say is, we try not to scare people, but if you think that the government, right? If you think the government cares about the air quality that's inside of your home, there's been books out there for years called, Fresh Air for Life, where they call out that the indoor air is between 10 to 100 times more toxic than outdoor air. And there's also something called sick building syndrome. And that's when you're exposed to lots of toxins. And we're not even going to get into, where I loved when you broke down the dioxin story, because not a lot of people understand how small of a particle of a dioxin can be. It can wreak havoc on the human body. And most people don't realize that any man-made structure, when it is burnt down, it is going to release dioxins.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That's 100% true. It's just chemistry. Because when you heat the PVC piping material that's in virtually every structure, and also certain kinds of polyester materials in clothing that, PVC-like materials, but also flooring materials and vinyl siding and so on, right? You burn that stuff, you create dioxins. And remember that a dioxin particle can cause cancer even with exposures of a millionth of a gram.
I mean, we're talking about femtograms.
Femtograms. It's insane. Well, I guess that's a billionth of a millionth of, because we're talking micrograms, nanograms, picograms, and then femtograms. Femtograms of exposure can give you cancer. And there's no way to, trap that with plastic or anything. You have to treat it. You have to treat your air constantly for it to be clean. I mean, isn't that the big takeaway from this? You can't just trust, because look, in California, all these fires are blowing all this smoke into people's homes. That smoke settles. That smoke contains particles that are toxic. You've got to actually treat the indoor air, is my point.
Yeah, 100%. And when you start realizing that, things like dioxin, I've had multiple people who their expertise, they eat, breathe, and sleep dioxins. That's not my world. My world is understanding how the air and the water is absolutely trying to kill us. And we have to fend for ourselves. The Make Air Healthy Again movement, it starts with mom and dad. There is no politician in Washington, D.C. that is coming to save anybody. It all starts at home. And that's what I love about, the whole Health Ranger approach has been about transparency, but you've been about educating, right? You know that you cannot save everybody, but what you can do is grow your circle, right? It almost reminds me of like the Audi symbol, right? You've got to intertwine these small little circles and start to grow it. But something like dioxins, most people don't even understand, like especially in men, this is something that can be passed down through generations. And when you start looking at the link between dioxins and fertility, you start to understand why it's important to clean the air. And if you are anywhere near that East Palestine train derailment or anywhere in California, these dioxins, they're not going to just go away, right? Look at how much food comes from California.
And so let's talk about air treatment technology, because your company has pioneered a particular solution. And I want to point out to the audience that there are, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are two basic approaches to treating indoor air. The first approach is to try to trap all the particles by blowing it through like a HEPA filter. That's sort of the classic way that it's been done. But beyond a certain size or smaller than a certain size, the particles go right through. And those filters, can clog up and they can become ineffective pretty quickly. But what your technology does is it actually treats the air and it neutralizes the toxins out there. At least that's the way I understand it. But you go ahead and describe it better.
So are you familiar with Raytheon?
Yeah, unfortunately, we all know Raytheon.
So back in the day, okay, Alan Johnston, our chief technology officer, he did work on the intercontinental ballistic missile systems that protect the United States from long-range missiles. He was one of the engineers that worked on developing. He worked on developing that technology. And what Alan does is, not only did he run 225 engineers in Washington, D.C. on Hughes aircraft, but he's one of those guys who applies science to absolutely everything that he does. And I can tell you that if you've ever had a significant person in your life, whether it be your wife, a girlfriend, or a mother, I always tell people that if you want to task a man with doing something, have a wife who is upset driving him behind it. And that's what happened. That's what happened with Alan. Alan said that there was an issue in the filtration industry. He said most of the guys that are out there are trying to use a fan and they're trying to draw the pollution, the mold, the particulate, the pathogen to a filter and try to collect it.
Right.
But the issue is, let's say something like mold, right? If you don't have a very high intensity UV bulb that's shining directly on that filter, you can then start to do something called cross-colonization. So you can get mold spores that start to grow, and you can have multiple mold spores start creating like a super mold, and then you're blowing it back into the environment.
Right.
So when you start realizing that engineers, they speak differently, right? If you ever want to feel small, and I'm speaking to your audience because Mike, you know a lot about a lot of things, but for the lay person, when you sit at a Christmas party with a bunch of engineers and you hear the way that they talk about Browning in motion and lysis and duplicating what Mother Nature does on that approach, I asked Alan, I said, Alan, I'm going to these doctors, I'm going to these biochemists. When I'm talking with Dr. Judy Mikovits and I'm talking with Edward Group from Global Healing, they get it. I go, but how do I get this information to the person that's out there that's just an HVAC contractor or a mom who's trying to protect their kid?
Right.
And he goes, Michael, this is how you explain it. Okay. We all know that air is starting to kill us. We know that. We know that what we're breathing, right, is a direct relationship to our health. Because if we are what we eat, we are what we drink. Well, guess what? We are what we breathe. He said, but Michael, the way that you have to produce it and break it down and present it to the regular person is tell them that there's two methods. And you already touched on this, Mike. Imagine a rat trap, right? You've got the trap, you put the little piece of cheese there, and you just sit back and you wait. And you're hoping that pest, that rodent is going to come, and it's going to come out there and it's going to grab that piece of cheese and it's going to get trapped. He goes, that's the mentality with most of the filter companies that are out there. They're waiting for the pathogen and keeping their fingers crossed that pollution will get trapped into that filter. It's
Right.
what's known as reactive. I go, awesome. Okay, perfect. I go, so what makes us different? He goes, with the V3 technology, we're proactive. He goes, we are like the cat. I go, the cat? He goes, yeah. He goes, you release a cat in the house and it's going to go into every room. It's going to jump up on the walls. It's going to jump on the furniture, and it is going to go after the pathogen. And we are releasing the cat. So we're a proactive technology. The approach that we took came from Mother Nature itself. And I said, well, I understand that you guys filed a bunch of patents. and you guys had all of this stuff laid out there. I go, how come our product is no longer patented? And he goes, Michael, he goes, 95% of the companies that are out there could duplicate our technology. He goes, but then they would lose the residual filter income. They want to get people on a subscription model where they're continually breaking down and having to buy more filters. And I was like, wow. I go, that's pretty incredible that a company like that.
Let me interrupt you there, because as I understand it, and I've used your product for quite some time, very successfully, by the way, I love the way it makes the air smell. It smells like air after a lightning storm. You know what I mean? That
Yes.
clean air, that ionized air smell. But it's not just an ionizer. You have a photoreactive plate inside your unit that is producing specific reactive molecules, correct? And I have two questions for you. Please describe that process, what those are. And then secondly, talk to us about how long that plate typically lasts, because it's much longer than a filter.
Yeah, good question. So I will say that if you do your diligence and you take that plate out periodically, depending on so many internal factors, do you have pets? Do you cook with curry? Are you one of those people that still believes that cigarette smoke is safe? Are you smoking in the house? Completely dependent on how many pollutions you have into the house. I recommend every 6 months you take the plate out and you can clean it with something like vinegar, or you can use 50-50 warm water in a solution that we have that's on our email list or on our Substack. We literally tell people how to clean the plate. You use a soft bristle toothbrush. If you wake up in the morning and your husband doesn't tell you that you're beautiful, ma'am, use his toothbrush. We don't care. It doesn't matter, right? So what you're talking about is photocatalytic oxidation, and you're talking about the reaction that's happening off of the metal arcing off of the plate that's inside of there. So when lightning strikes outside, it does three things. It scares the crap out of my dog, and it creates low-level ozone, and it creates negative ions. The ions are very, very powerful because they attach to anything that has a positive charge. But it doesn't just stop there. The PCO technology is a quad metallic proprietary cell that has a 254 nanometer UVX light inside of it that creates a catalyst. So when you start talking about things like dioxins, good luck with a filter. Dioxins are rendered inert and broken down by photocatalytic oxidation because it is producing what's known as superhydroxyls or superoxide ions. And that is creating a catalyst. It's unbelievably quick at breaking down pathogens, viruses, bacteria. And then if you were to imagine, and this is where it gets really cool, Mike. I've had customers for hundreds of months that had been using like really good HEPA filters. And they say, hey, man, I was watching a podcast with Judy Mikovits or Dr. Ely from the Energetic Healing Institute, and they were talking about your PCO technology in the V3. And I thought, hey, you know what? I've always had issues with the pollen. I've had issues with the dander. And even though I've had these big filters in my house, one in the bedroom, I put one in the living room, and I change my HVAC filter like every couple months, or if they don't change it every month. And they go, but when I wake up in the morning and the sun is kind of penetrating through, I can kind of see that light that's still floating through, and I see all the particles floating around. And when I plugged in your V3, within 2 or 3 days, that haze of dust that I used to always see floating around is no longer there. It's just gone.
Right. And what's really remarkable about what you're saying here is that your unit, through the metal alloy that you mentioned, and through the photoelectric phenomena that are taking place, it's generating very specifically charged molecules that denature pathogens in the air. And this works very similar. For our audience, a great way to describe this is the way chlorine dioxide works in water tanks, okay? So let's say I have a big water tank, because I live on a ranch, and I've got a water tank for goats and chickens and whatever. Or you might have cows or horses or whatever. Well, algae likes to grow in that water tank, right? So you could buy a water filter, and you could pump a bunch of water through this filter and try to trap the algae, which doesn't work. And the filter itself just gets clogged up with the algae, and the algae's never really gone from the tank. Or you could take a couple of chlorine dioxide tablets, from the Safrax company, for example, drop them in the tank, and boom, through chemistry, it creates chlorine dioxide that goes throughout the tank and seeks out the algae and kills it, denatures it, without posing any health risk to the animals. It turns out it's actually good for animals, and there's good science to back that up. At certain parts per million concentrations, it benefits the animals. So you're talking about that, Mike, in air, but the chemistry is actually very similar to that.
So I've got something that's pretty cool. And Alan Johnston, back in the late 80s and 90s, it's an approach that I'm sure a lot of people were familiar with. And I really liked the approach because, Mike, back in the 80s and 90s, you knew your neighbor, right? You knew the guy that lived down the street. It's kind of like, remember the show Cheers, Everybody Knows Your Name, right? Like you went to the local grocery store and you just knew everybody. So Alan talked about when they first had this technology coming out there, he said that it was too good to believe, right? And I said, how did you guys grow the company so fast? He goes, well, have you ever heard of the term Minnesota Nice? And I'm like, yeah, I've done the home shows. I've done trade shows. I've done doctor shows. I've done medical seminars, and I've spoke at multiple chiropractic and homeopathic events in Minnesota. He goes, so what we would do is, we would go to churches and we would talk to the deacons. We would donate a couple of the air purifiers to the churches. And then we would say that if people were interested, we'd let them borrow the machine for a couple days and they could go in and try the technology first. And I go, so what would happen? He goes, when we would go to pick it up, they would say, out of my cold, dead hands. You have to get a crowbar to pry this out, because my wife, who was allergic to the dog, I thought we were going to have the dog live outside for the rest of its life. It would freeze to death during the winter. This technology literally saved my life. And he goes, but as the years went on, people stopped answering the doors, and the country started to get less and less friendly. So what they did was they created a working model. And I'm going to show you guys really cool. I love geeking out with science. But this right here is just it's a regular box. And inside of here, we put a little bit of a model train oil on a coil, and the coil heats up. So back in the 80s and 90s, we were really popular, unfortunately, in the bars, and I'm not trying to promote any particular bar, but there was a lot of them in the Midwest where they still allowed cigarette smoke, unfortunately. And one of the biggest issues that they had was the cigarette smoke going from the smoking section to the non-smoking section, right? Now we're going back in time and dating our technology.
Yeah, and on airplanes too. That was crazy.
Right, exactly. So what would happen is we would start going to the chiropractic shows and the medical shows, and we would really take this part of the demonstration and say, look, I'm going to show you guys, you could go get a leaf blower and see that my box here is impenetrable. We would fill the box up with the smoke and show them that anything that is floating around, right? Anything that's floating around, and my light in the studio is pretty bright, but I'll show you here by putting my little cell phone there. You can kind of see like how I was talking about when you wake up in the middle of the night and you go out and you grab your flashlight to get to the bathroom, and you can kind of see all that stuff floating around in your house. Or if you open up your blinds, right, and the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, you can kind of see that particulate that's just floating around. Well, what Alan had figured out is when you can demonstrate to people, it doesn't matter how much dust, pollen, or dander that they have inside of their house. I'm going to show you guys very quickly that our technology, once you activate it, I'm going to put on the AM/FM antenna and needlepoint negative ionization. That charges the particles so fast in the room that you put it in, that by the end of the first day, you start to see crisp, clear, cool air in the environment. And I tell people, I'll tell you this, when I break down, Mike, viruses, pollen, dander, bacteria, mold spores, when I've got a brain surgeon or an orthopedic surgeon at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery every year when we go to Las Vegas and do the huge convention, I'm just like sitting there talking about all the scientific, breaking down the viruses. And the second that I say most of our customers dust their house about 85 to 90% less, their wife is like, I'll take 4. Like
Yeah.
they're so excited when you talk about cutting down on dog hair, pollen, and dust.
Well, wait, I've got a couple of questions for you, but let me mention to our audience where they can find this product. It's at healthrangerstore.com/clean air. And there you can find the Triad Air Pro and the V3. And there's a mini version that I want to ask you about because I won't travel without this. Thank you for sending me that sample. I literally will not travel without it for car,
and
plane,
I know
whatever.
the reason why you won't travel without it is because, like, you know me, I go to a lot of conferences. If Dr. Group calls me and says, Michael, I'm holding a conference and it's about cancer, it's about reversing biological age. If he needs me there, I'm going to sponsor the show and I'm going to go there. But what I know is that wherever you go in the country, Mike, you're allowed to check into the hotel room after 3:00 and checkout's always at 11. So on average, you've got about 4 hours for every single one of those rooms. Once they get cleaned, they've got to spend about 6 minutes on average going into those rooms, and they do not change the filters that are inside of those air conditioners, and they do not go in and disinfect every square inch.
No.
And the worst part of a cigarette or medicinal cannabis that had been smoked in a room is when they try to mask it with another chemical. So then
Yeah.
you walk in and it's just like, this is even some of the nicest hotels in the world, right? I was in Washington, D.C., a couple years ago for an upscale event, and we were at the Gaylord Palms on the 18th floor, and still I could smell like a nasty smoke when I checked in, and I was like, can I get another room? And they're like, unfortunately, we're sold out. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go downstairs, and I grabbed one of my minis out of the booth. I plugged it in, and now it's the last thing that I pack in my suitcase, and it is the first thing that I take out, plug it right into the hotel room. And I'm 20 minutes, I'm good to go.
Yeah, no kidding. And everybody knows I'm extremely sensitive to synthetic fragrance. And I have a very sensitive sense of smell. At my lab, they joke that I'm the human mass spec machine because I can smell like wires getting hot before there's a short that would cause a fire, like in a battery system. I can smell it, pinpoint it. I've done that twice. I've prevented 2 potential fires that way just from my sense of smell. But I can smell everybody's artificial fragrance and laundry detergent and everything. And you're right. You go into a hotel room, all these other smells are left behind, and they try to mask it. And then also, you think about if you get into an Uber. Is that clean air in somebody else's car where some other contaminated person has been in there? No, that's filthy air. Who knows what's been going on in that Uber? I don't want to take, any part in that without cleaning the air. So it's another great use of the mini version. But let me ask you this about the plate in your main version, your Pro version. You said you want to wash it every 6 months, but how long does that plate last before you have to get a new plate?
I've had mine in my system here at my studio for 5 years. 5 years. In fact, the machine, I'm going to grab it just because thank God I practice with what I preach, and I actually have my air purifier running.
Yeah.
So this guy right here, 5 years, the plate's been in there. I take it out once every 6 months, clean it with a little bit of vinegar and a soft bristle toothbrush. And I've been using that same plate for 5 years. Now, I will be honest, if you are, and not to take away from, any certain type of person or passion for food, but let's just say that you have a palate for ethnic dishes and you like to cook with curry and cumin, and you put this in your kitchen, right? You might have to replace that plate every 2 years if you're doing heavy amount of cooking in the kitchen and using a lot of spices. And that's just me being transparent and honest. But the plates are very inexpensive. So you're never going to get stuck into a cycle where you're having to pay $30, $40, $50, and upwards of $80 for filters with some other companies.
Right. And one of the things that I did in my house is I set that unit very close to the air intake for the HVAC.
Yes.
Right? Do a lot of your customers do that? Because I want the air to be, circulated, that it's treating.
Anywhere where you put it, the machine is going to do its job. We just recommend that you always put it in a central hallway or in a larger room. A lot of people are tempted to put it in their bedroom. You don't need to do it. You put it living room, dining room, kitchen, 4 or 5 feet off the ground, have it in a pretty open room, and you just follow the instructions. You set it to the square footage day by day until you get to the point where you're like, everything in the house is crisp, cool, and clean. And I promise you, I don't know if any of your followers or listeners or anybody that subscribes to you have ever been to Texas, but I can tell you, when you go to the Dallas Cowboy Stadium and they do the rodeo there, when you do the trade shows, the one thing that you understand in Texas, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but one thing that I notice is when you go to Texas, usually the bigger the belt buckle, it usually means the bigger the wad of cash that the guys have. I was doing the rodeo there in Dallas, Texas, and I had a guy that come up to me, big old belt buckle, and he goes, my wife told me about this machine. He goes, I don't believe it's going to really work. He goes, but she's been begging me. He goes, so I'm going to get one. And I was like, all right. I go, just sign right here. And he goes, oh, no. He goes, you know what? He goes, let me get 2 or 3 of them. He goes, I got 4,500 square feet and an 18-foot ceiling. And I said, let me show you the technology. And he goes, I don't need to see it. My wife said she wants it. I'm going to get it. He goes, I just know that ain't going to do the whole house. And I said, sir, I go, we're here for 10 days doing the rodeo. Why don't you start with one machine and just see how it goes? And he's like, you're talking yourself out of a bigger sale. And I go, for me, sir, it's not about the money. It's about getting the technology out there. So he bought the one machine. A couple days later, guy comes back. He goes, I need to get 2 more of them. I go, the one wasn't enough? He goes, nope. He goes, it was enough. He goes, but my wife is so mad that I didn't get one for her mother and I didn't get one for my mom. He goes, so I need one for my mother-in-law. He goes, they came over, and he goes, we got a big 18-foot ceiling. And he goes, we got a big stained piece of glass that's up there. And he goes, you can see colors coming through. He goes, it always looks like there's rainbow dust floating in the house. He goes, for the first time in 8 years, my wife ain't seen nothing floating in the window. And she says, if that little thing did that, she goes, your mom and my mom need one. And I go, it's just incredible. And that's just because the technology, Mike, it's proactive. It's not reactive.
Right. And that's key, that it is proactive. And, it speaks to the issue. I think it's also more energy efficient than trying to draw a lot of air through filters all day long. And, when you're trying to draw air through filters, I forgot the terms they use, but, how many times per hour does the air in the room turn over,
Clean air delivery rate.
Delivery rate. Okay. So in order to get that rate high, you have to expend a lot of energy on the fan. And you don't really know if you're covering everything. But with your machine, you know that those charged particles are going out everywhere. They're just because of physics, like they're going into everything where air is accessible.
Yeah. I had a guy one time, and you'll love this. You'll love this. I was in Chicago at one of the bigger medical distribution shows. It was the radiology show. It's the largest radiology show in the country. And I had a guy come up to me and he's like, yeah, he goes, but filters are way better to go than the technology you're talking about. He goes, because your fan is just blowing out a proactive technology. He goes, but I just don't understand how it's going to filter the air in the house. And I go, sir, that's the problem. I go, most of the filters that are out there, when you read the clean air delivery rate that it's getting, they're measuring with a ppm, which is a parts per million reader, and they're in a lab and they're blowing the air at a very fast rate into the filter. And then they sell you a purification system with a 52-watt fan. I go, it's not the 300-watt blower that they were using when they were testing. And I go, let me show you what I'm talking about. And I had walked right across where my booth was. There was a concession stand. I went and grabbed one of those paper straws. And I grabbed like 3 or 4 of them. His buddy that was with him, I think it was his wife and him himself. I gave all of them a straw. And I said, here, I go, take the straw out of the wrapper. And I balled up a little piece of the paper and I put it on my hand. And I got about 4 or 5 feet away from the guy. And I go, take that straw and I want you to blow. And he goes, and the little piece of paper from the straw wrapper, it went blowing off. And I did the same thing to his wife and the same thing to his partner. And I go, that was 5 feet away. I go, now here, I go, let me get 6 inches away from your face. I go, now I want you to suck. I go, suck that into the straw. And none of them could do it. Right. And I go, so what you just proved to me is, I go, filters are only effective if the pathogen gets close enough to the filter to draw it in.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I also want to explain to our audience that how your machine has different settings based on square footage. Now, I figured that this just has to do with the intensity of the photoreactive, the catalyst. You're just putting more energy into it to produce more output for a larger square footage area so that you don't exceed maybe a certain airborne ppm in a small space, right? So
correct.
You want to be in a certain range, and that's what the square footage setting is all about, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're in a 500 square foot apartment in New York City, and by the way, that's probably a $7,500 a month apartment for 500 square feet. But if you're in a 500 square foot setting, you're never going to have to set our machine above the first click, because what you're talking about is the plate that's inside of there. You arc the amount of electricity of activated oxygen, or what's better known as ozone, off of that plate. Now that PCO technology by itself, Dr. Gary Rosen, who's the leading mold expert in the state of Florida, he actually writes the mold remediation protocol for everybody who gets licensed in the state of Florida to test and treat for mold. He has tested the V3 air purifier in his chamber with just the PCO technology without using any activated oxygen. But for me, I like coming home and not smelling what my cat did in the litter box while I was gone for the day. So I always have my machine matching the square footage of the room that I put it in. And then when you get people like you, Mike, who are smart enough to put it close to the air vent or the return HVAC, then that technology is going through and distributing equally into every single home. And I've had customers who don't even have AC or even have window units, and they say that they still have received incredible results because of the technology following the natural airflow of the home. And then people will look at me and be like, well, I don't have natural airflow. My house is just so airtight and it's stagnant. And I go, is it a 1 or 2 story home? And they go, it's a 2-story home. I go, okay. I go, where's the farthest room from the kitchen? And they go, my master bedroom. I go, do you have a bathroom in that bedroom? Yeah, I got my master bedroom. I go, a master bathroom. Okay. So you go upstairs. I'm downstairs in the kitchen, and you go into your bedroom door and you close the door. Yeah. Okay. You go into the bathroom and close that door. Okay. And I burn a piece of bacon downstairs in the skillet. Or let's say that you're a vegan and you are offended by bacon. So I burn a bag of popcorn on accident. If within 5 minutes, any room in the house that can smell that bacon or that burnt popcorn, Mike, our technology is going to get there. It'll follow the same pathway that odor went. The only thing we can't do is when the house is sealed off. So if you purchase a unit from the Health Ranger store and you want to try the V3 technology, we are not going to clean your next door neighbor's air. That we can't do. We haven't figured that technology out. So it has to be within the 4 walls or the ceiling and the roof. That's where our technology can go.
Right. Now, you mentioned like burned bacon odors and so on. What about things like skunk odors? Does it work for things like that?
Oh my gosh. So one of the best testimonies that we have, I had a dog that got sprayed by a skunk, and a woman took the dog and put her in the bathroom. She had tried soaking the dog in like a tomato paste and couldn't get rid of the skunk smell. She goes, I put the air purifier in there with the dog for about 2 hours and it got rid of the smell. And I can tell you, there's a very powerful plant that's grown here in the United States and all over the world that a lot of people will use it or abuse it for medicinal purposes. And I can tell you that there's a lot of companies out there that have these plants that smell a lot like skunks, and they use our technology because when you rent one of those dispensaries and it's next to a bank, they don't want the smell permeating into the bank. So they use our technology. We're actually notorious. And we supply to a couple of the biggest growers in the United States for a particular product.
Well, that's really interesting. Wow. Yeah. So many uses for it. And I also want to, for people who just want to increase their air quality and purity, even without a machine like yours, I think it's common knowledge that, houseplants can help. But I mean, what's your take on houseplants? It seems like you'd have to have a full jungle in your house to really be effective for all the air. Like a little houseplant here and there, I don't think it's going to do the whole job. You know what I mean?
Especially if you have, Mike, if you've got multiple people living in the home, you need, like when you look at the mother-in-law, right? The mother-in-law tongue, I think they refer to it as the snake plant. You need about 4 to 5 shoulder level plants per person in the house. And you start running out of window space because it does need a little bit of sunlight. It can be indirect. And the snake plants, I love them because it's a plant that you can't kill. You can be gone for 2 months and that thing will still be alive. But when you start talking about pathogens and viruses and dioxins, there is no plant in the world that is going to duplicate what our technology is doing. But I will give everybody a piece of free advice. And if you really want to increase without having to make a purchase, if you go online and you research what things in your house can be replaced with borax and vinegar, throw out everything that it can replace. If you have anything in your home that says call poison control, if swallowed, throw it in the trash. It doesn't belong in your house. So we can stop poisoning ourselves with the billions and billions of dollars that get spent in marketing to brainwash you. You don't need to put anything that needs to be plugged in. Not naming any companies out there, but that stuff is toxic. Just like you said, Mike, you hit the nail right on the head when you get into that Uber and you're like, man, it smells fresh and clean in here like pineapple. You're smelling synthetic chemicals.
Yeah, absolutely. And your list is great. I'm glad you mentioned borax and also vinegar. I would just add, baking soda to that, sodium bicarbonate.
Oh, yeah.
With those 3 things and soap, like a really good base soap, I guess 4 things total, you can replace everything that's a cleaning or an anti-mold or a scrub or whatever. You can replace it all with about 4 ingredients. And actually, if you add in like those chlorine dioxide tablets, now then that stuff you can create like chlorine dioxide water that you can like brush on the corners of your shower stall, and it just completely gets rid of the mold there, everything. I mean, because I don't buy any of that store-bought garbage. I don't buy those garbage products. I don't buy air fresheners. I don't buy plug-in anything. I don't buy cleaning products. I just have the basics, like you just said. And I have those in bulk. I have like a massive supply of baking soda, like way too much. And people like poor people waste money on expensive cleaning products, while people like myself who have some money, I'll spend a fraction of what they spend on baking soda, and it's more effective.
100%. And it's better for your home. It's better for your body. It's better for your environment. And, I can tell you that, those chlorine dioxide tablets, man, they're incredible for keeping around the house for anything and everything that you want to do, from cleaning. Oh, yeah. You could literally use it to clean anything in the house.
Yeah. I sometimes, if I have like a really bad load of dishes where maybe some food has gone bad in a dish container and like there's mold in it, I want to have like an extra anti-mold treatment inside the dishwasher. So before I close the dishwasher door, I'll throw a chlorine dioxide tablet in there, boom. And now it's just scrubbing all the dishes with chlorine dioxide. It's freaking awesome. All right, but let me talk about something else. I want to talk about radiation and fallout, and the fact that, cesium-137 is the most common, or I would say the most dangerous radioisotope that is produced following like dirty bomb events or any kind of a nuclear attack. And it has a half-life of around 29 years. What people need to know is that the cesium-137 isn't just floating around by itself. You're not going to have like cesium atoms individually floating around. They're attached to dust particles. They're attached to other things. So and I'm not claiming that your machine, stops radiation. It doesn't, but it can certainly take the dust particles out of the air on which the radioisotopes are hitching a ride, correct?
Not only that, but so when I was talking with Alan Johnson, we were specifically talking about dioxins and how photocatalytic oxidation can make a huge difference in removing dioxins and airborne particles from the air. But we've actually been putting a lot of money into researching, radon, which is the second leading cause from the last time I remember. I believe it's the second leading cause of lung cancer behind cigarette smoke in the US. And we have seen a significant reduction in those types of things. But you hit the nail right on the head. It's removing the particles that they're attaching themselves to. So when you put this technology into the home, you're taking a proactive approach to protecting your family. Because again, everything that is inside of the air, inside of our house, it is trying to bring us down. And we've gotten so polluted that you literally have to start combating with the most scientifically advanced technology to protect your loved ones.
And I would say that, as we've lived in this advance of so much technology, the internet, and then mobile devices, and now virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, and AI robots coming up next, all of these things actually encourage people to spend more time indoors. And with COVID, we had lockdowns indoors, and that was like a prison sentence for a lot of people. And they even said, don't dare go outside. You might spread the virus, so stay inside. My God, what people needed was sunshine and exercise and some outside air, right? And they were prisoners in their own home.
It was ridiculous. And it was all based off of lies. There was absolutely no science. We needed that fresh sunlight. We needed that vitamin D. We needed to be grounded, right? That's the most important thing, is getting outside and touching nature, taking your shoes off and getting grounded. And, that's one of the things that's so incredible about, working with manufacturers like Allen, who are going to make sure that they're putting every single ounce of research and development back into building better machines. And, I don't know if you've ever seen anybody, when you do the Pledge of Allegiance, right? You go like this and you do the Pledge of Allegiance. We were at one of the biggest technology shows called Consumer Electronics, the CES show. And there was a guy, and I'm not going to call him out. He was manufacturing a new type of technology, air purification, that's filter and PECO based. And they were in San Francisco. And the guy came up, and he was about 3 or 4 booths away from me. He had seen my tripod that was set up. And one of the things that separates me, Mike, from everybody else is I don't care how many followers you have on Instagram. I don't care how many followers, come to your church or pastors, have following online. Whether you've got no friends or 1 million friends, if you come up and tell me how my machine changed your life, I'm going to ask you to get a video testimony. And every 3 or 4 minutes, I'd have people walking up. I had this back and I bought this from my cousin, my uncle, it's the best, whatever it is that they want to say. And we would literally take my phone out, and I'd have the tripod set up, getting all of these testimonies. And the guy at the very end of the second day had walked over and was like, let me get one of your clipboards. And I saw his hand was like kind of like doing the Pledge of Allegiance. He's filling out the clipboard, and I go, what's going on? And he turns like this away from my camera, and he shows me the name of his company. He goes, I'm the senior vice president for that company over there. He goes, but with how many testimonies you have, he goes, I want your air purifier in my house.
Okay. All right. Last question for you. One of the last questions. Now, just in full disclosure to our audience, obviously your company financially benefits from selling the product, but you make a very helpful product that is helping, I believe, protect people's health and wellness. And then we benefit as well. So folks, if you choose to buy this product from healthrangerstore.com/clean air, you are helping to support this network and this platform so that we can do all these amazing interviews and bring you this information. But what happens, Mike, if somebody, for whatever reason, is not happy with the product? What's your return policy or guarantee?
So if somebody plugs in our technology and they don't notice an incredible difference, all they have to do is call customer support. We will send them a return label. They will send it back, and we will issue them 100% full refund, because we want our customers to be happy. And I can tell you that over the course of 36 years with Allen Manufacturing and, my 20-year involvement in the country, we don't get returns, we get referrals. But every once in a while, somebody will purchase something without permission, and they'll see that ticket on the credit card statement, and someone can get upset with it. So if it's a buyer's remorse due to the cost, I do not want anybody to have to sleep uncomfortable on the couch. In my 30 plus years of doing trade shows and growing up in the business, I know that a happy wife is a happy life. And I do not want anybody to have to sleep on the couch because they made a purchase without asking their significant others. So pray about it. Talk to mom and dad. Talk to your wife before you purchase so they know what you're getting. But absolutely, if for any reason someone's not happy, we are not going to keep them stuck with a product.
That's good to hear. And my experience has been the same. People are really thrilled about this technology when they use it and they see the difference. But yeah, occasionally if somebody has caused a problem in their household with a purchase, they may request a refund, and that's perfectly okay. So the bottom line, folks, is you can go to healthrangerstore.com/clean air, and here you can see the Triad Air Pro or the V3. And these are the same cost. These are essentially the same product, just different colors, right, Mike?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And, look, they're not inexpensive, but what's the cost of, pollution and mold in your house? Think about this as prevention instead of treating a problem after it's become a massive problem. This is prevention. There's zero risk of doing it. And it's something that actually I've had in my house now for like 2 years, I believe, and it's been working great. In fact, I kind of forgot about it. I kind of forgot that my air was cleaner, but I bet if I turn it off, I would notice a problem. But this is what happens with your product, Mike. Like people get it, they plug it in. At first, they're like, wow. And then, a few months later, they're not thinking about it.
Have you ever seen the Vitamix, the old smoothie maker? Remember back in the 80s and 90s, it was usually in the commercial kitchens, and it was like it was the blender that you could throw in screws and copper pennies, and it would emulsify it. It doesn't matter. But anyways, I don't push other products out there. I don't know if you have any blenders or you refer them, but Vitamix, great.
I have Vitamix. I make my smoothie was made on a Vitamix this morning, right here. I have 2 Vitamixes side by side in my kitchen for smoothies. So
I'm going to tell you, and I'll if we have to close with this, I was approached at one of the shows. I think it was the Natural Products West or Natural Products East. It was one of the natural product shows, and I was there. We've been sponsoring their shows, doing their shows for a long time. There was a guy that was there with the Vitamix, and the guy was just making samples all day. Finally, when we got a little break, the guy came up to me and he goes, I want to give you the best testimony that you've ever gotten. And I go, okay, sure. This guy was about 70 years old. He goes, I had a friend who was in downtown Miami. He goes, I've got a condo. He goes on the 22nd floor in Hollandale Beach Boulevard. And we were doing my 50th. It was a 50th anniversary of graduation of my school. And my friend had flown in, and she came to spend a couple days with me. He goes, but she had walked into my house and sat down, and I was making her an espresso. He had a little bit of an Italian accent. So, I could really understand, but he had a thick accent. But get this, Mike, they're there. She's at the house for about 20, 30 minutes. And he goes, she gets up to go to the bathroom, and she stops and she points to my little water bowl. He goes, we got the running water. He goes, I've got 3 cats in the house. And she goes, what's that? And he goes, that's my cat's water bowl. And she goes, you don't have a cat in this house? And he goes, yeah, I've got 3. She goes, no, I'm deathly allergic to cats. I can't be if I get within 5 feet of the front door, I start breaking out into hives. And he goes, no. He goes, it's impossible. He goes, I've got 3 cats here. He goes, you can't be allergic. And he goes, wait a second. He goes, I had just bought an air purifier a couple months ago from one of these trade shows. He goes, I've got it sitting running there in the kitchen. And he says to me, he goes, how is that possible? And I go, because you can't be allergic to a cat. I go, you're allergic to the protein that breaks off of the dander. I go, and our machine is constantly dropping it down to the ground. And he goes, wow. He goes, that's why that was such a powerful impact that it made on her.
Totally.
That, her life experience was she couldn't be in an occupied building where cats existed. But yet with our technology running, it was possible.
Amazing. And it makes perfect sense. And I'd like to have you back. We're going to wrap this up today, but when I have you back, I want to talk about what people can do then to also really clean their floors and surfaces without reintroducing particles back into the air. So we'll save that conversation for next time. But I want to thank you for your time. It's Mike Dillon from airwaterhealing.com, and your product, the Traid Air Pro and the V3 and the Mini, are all available at healthrangerstore.com/clean air. And thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. It's been really great speaking to you about this. We've covered a lot of ground.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and continue to do great work.